Yeah, so I'm going into my third year in my PhD. I'm part of Ari Jules' group here, and I'm going to talk about off-chain coordination with something called liquefaction. So the story starts with private keys, and private keys on blockchains represent ownership of assets. So if you have a private key, then you can transfer any assets that are associated with the public address. And because of this, if your key gets stolen, then sweeper bots can come in and steal your assets as soon as you try to send them. And because you don't want to share your key and have your assets stolen, you want to keep it secret. And because of all of this, we have this widespread assumption throughout blockchains that keys are held by single entities. So, you might have a person holding one key, you might have a person holding many keys, but in general, keys are held by a single entity because you don't want your assets taken from you. And because if you did want to collude with someone, you would need to trust them completely. And there are a lot of things in blockchains that kind of reinforce this assumption. So things like NFT profile pictures associated with your account, ENS domains, these kind of attach identity to your blockchain address. And then even when we're analyzing blockchains, we look at things like holder numbers where there's kind of this implicit assumption that that's roughly correlated with the number of unique individuals holding some token. So we have all these assumptions about private keys. We have assumptions about the secrecy that you don't share with anybody and that some single entity controls it. And then we also have assumptions about ownership, meaning that if you see a transaction posted with an address that people have associated with you, then that means you must have sent that transaction. Similarly, if you have a message signed from an address associated with you, it means you must have consented to signing that message. And we see this all the time, even just like analyzing the blockchain. So if you look on Etherscan and you see transactions sent from Vitalik's address, then you assume that Vitalik consented to these transactions and sent them himself. So if you have a private key, you can sign any sort of message. But what we can do is we can use TEs to kind of change that. And we introduced this concept called key encumbrance, where the TE, you generate a private key inside it, and the TE will restrict which messages you can sign with that private key. So the TE might, for instance, let you sign almost any message, and it will enforce certain restrictions on what you can do with it. The most easy way that we found of kind of specifying these rules are just creating a smart contract. And this smart contract will run on a TE blockchain so that it has the privacy and confidentiality and integrity guarantees that you get with TEs. So the upshot here is that the TE enforced smart contract that generated this private key is now the owner of the key and can kind of do whatever it wants in terms of who is able to control the key. So for instance, you can now have a key that, say, Alice can sign certain messages for and Bob can sign other messages for. And Alice and Bob don't necessarily have to trust each other at all because they trust the TE will uphold its smart contract. So this actually breaks a ton of our assumptions about private keys that we generally have. So now keys can be held by multiple people who don't trust each other. And a message signed from an account that's associated with you might not have been from you. And same with transactions. It might have come from someone else that your encumbered key authorized. But what's really fascinating about this is the encumbrance that I talked about. This is completely invisible to the public blockchain. So you can do all of these shenanigans completely outside of Ethereum, and no one really even knows that you've done this. And the TE's confidentiality guarantees, it kind of helps, you can kind of use that as a way to hide these agreements. Now, I'm not the first person to have studied this. Phil Dyan wrote a blog post about the rise of dark DAOs, that is, DAOs that are enable vote selling on DAOs. And then there's another one, a paper called Delegate T and some others that talk about ways of creating broker delegation in Web 2 accounts. Like, for instance, having an email address where you delegate access to some of your emails so that an assistant can help you manage them, something like that. So yeah, as I mentioned before, with key encumbrance, you can hide a lot of activity through that by just doing it off chain. And with dark DAOs, again, this is trustworthy vote buying of systems which target DAOs, and they separate the ownership of the DAO tokens from the voting power that they confer. So in this example, you might have a vote buyer who wants to buy a bunch of DAO votes and swing a proposal. And this briber might specify some price he is willing to pay for buying votes. And then users with encumbered wallets will have had to enroll in some encumbrance policy, as we call it, prior to doing this. But the encumbrance policy will say, for each DAO proposal, you can choose. You can either vote on the proposal yourself and give yourself exclusive access to voting on it, or you can sell this exclusive access to voting on this proposal to somebody else, and you no longer have control over that vote from your own accounts. And so, going back to this example, now the briber can reliably sell or can reliably buy votes from other people, and there's this fair exchange for the vote sellers are able to get the money, and the vote buyer is getting a guarantee that he'll be able to sign any vote he wants from these other accounts held by others. And this is completely dark, so you can't really show that. Or you can't see from looking at the voting records whether any of this sort of collusion happened. And the T's will help make sure that this is kind of confidential. And incidentally, it's actually pretty easy to build these on TE blockchains, especially ones which are EVM based. So we ended up using Oasis Sapphire as our platform to build a dark DAO. And we just wrote everything in Solidity. So we have our code posted, and I'll have a link to it at the end. But it's actually not too difficult to build these because of the EVM framework. We also built a second type of dark DAO that makes use of what we call autonomous accounts. So these are accounts that are completely owned by a TE smart contract. There's really not a concept of any other person who owns each account. And that will completely manage all of the DAO vote selling and so on. So with autonomous accounts, you can more easily create derivative assets. And so we actually liquefied DAO votes using this system, wherein you will trade your DAO tokens for what we call a dark DAO token. And the dark DAO token, you can't vote for it in for the DAO using the dark DAO token, but the dark DAO will automatically sell all of the votes that its tokens hold to the highest bidder at every election. So it's kind of like liquid staking for DAO tokens. It will accumulate some bribe money over time, and you can swap it back for a DAO token plus the bribe money at any time. So there are other interesting things you can do with key encumbrance. You can hold your tokens in other people's wallets. And again, this is largely invisible, these agreements that happen. So you can even trade tokens with other people holding tokens in encumbered wallets. And again, this is invisible from Ethereum. An interesting thing you can do with this is you can fake theft. So since you can trade ownership of assets without kind of revealing any proof of this on Ethereum, you can collude with some entity that is known to drain wallets, and you can in your collusion you can get a guarantee that they will give you ownership of any funds that you send to them, basically faking that your coins were stolen, although you still retain ownership of them afterward, probably for a fee. And then, of course, you can sell entire accounts because the TE has ownership of the key. So the TE can just kind of point who controls that key to somebody else. And you can with this, you can kind of create markets for accounts that are presumed to be eligible for airdrops. And you don't even have to know what format the airdrop takes. You can just say that I want to buy this entire account, which I think will be eligible for some airdrop in the future. Now, there are a lot of other applications to key encumbrance that I'd like to say are targets of it that we need to be aware of in the future as encumbrance might become more widespread. The first is soul-bound tokens. So soul-bound tokens have this assumption that that the ownership of them can't be transferred to anyone else because of the single entity key ownership assumption. So you can't actually transfer soul-bound tokens to other addresses, but you can still sell your key or sell proofs of ownership of this key to somebody else. Pretty much breaking the purpose of soul-bound tokens, which are to be used as like a reputation token. And then also, quadratic voting is another big target. So the idea behind quadratic voting is that you have some amount of DAO tokens, and you might take the square root of that to get what voting power you get in order to make these DAOs that use quadratic voting a bit more decentralized, where it's not completely plutocratic. But the problem is you can just distribute your tokens with willing colluders. And in some cases, you can even get a square of your voting power because of the quadratic voting system. And the reason this is important is like this will bypass any identity mechanisms because your colluders might have passed those identity checks, and you can still collude with them to acquire that voting power. So NFTs are often used for like getting access to events in like live in person, but with key encumbrance, you can just sell your access rights to these events to other people, even though they don't actually own the NFT or whatever it is that gives them access. And as I mentioned before, like reputation can be sold. So if your account, your address has really good reputation, you can sell that to someone else who wants to have an account with good reputation. And again, as I mentioned before, airdrops. What's especially unique about airdrops is that when you sell accounts, you can actually de-risk airdrop farming because you can separate the airdrop farmer that does all the tasks to qualify for the airdrop from the entity that might be specialized in selling the airdrop token as soon as it launches. So if there's some if the airdrop has a particular hidden time when it launches, and there's a group that's specialized in selling all their accumulated airdrop tokens immediately, then this kind of helps separate the two and de-risk the farming. It's been proposed that some Uniswap v4 hooks will give discounts to holders of maybe like an NFT or like having specific pools that will benefit particular accounts. But with key encumbrance, you can kind of just sell access to your account and get around these restrictions. So another thing you can do is you can kind of do a group buy where if you need some amount of reputation or some amount of coins to qualify for a discount, you can kind of collude with others to share just one account. And then you would just need 1 over n of the total required assets to maybe qualify for that. Privacy pools, interestingly, also have an application for key encumbrance. So with privacy pools, it's a privacy protocol that you can dissociate yourself from deposits that you don't want to associate yourself with. But what you can do with key encumbrance is you can encumber your key such that you're not allowed to sign proofs saying that you're dissociating from anyone else in your own set. So it's kind of like a completely private group that can't rat each other out in, which is pretty interesting. Now, you might ask, like, what sort of countermeasures can we have toward key encumbrance? But most of them that you might think of, like measuring latency to sign transactions or something like that, they don't work because key encumbered wallets act just like hardware wallets. So a lot of the same things you might run into, like maybe making the message size super long. Well, not many hardware wallets can support super long messages when signing transactions. There is one way you can definitely break liquefaction, and that's by making transactions or messages indistinguishable from each other for the same application. But at the same time, this creates a security risk, because then when users are signing these messages or these transactions, they don't know which one they're signing, and hardware wallets can't really tell the difference either then. So we do have an actual countermeasure, and that's called complete knowledge. And proof of complete knowledge is essentially a proof that you couldn't have encumbered your key. And it basically shows that your key must have been leaked over some insecure channel. And we have a couple of ways of creating this type of proof. Mahimna will explain them at SBC on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. if you're interested. So we're currently in the process of writing a paper about how to liquefy everything using key encumbrance. But in the meantime, we have a couple links here. We have our dark DAO work where we actually implemented complete dark DAOs and key encumbered wallets. And then we also wrote a paper about DAO decentralization. So feel free to check those out. And then I'll end with some discussion about Web 2 encumbrance. So Shin from Flashbots and Andrew Miller and Ryan and a couple others have been working on some encumbrance of Web 2 projects, which isn't as satisfying as Web 3, because the Web 2 service providers can kind of just change the backend interface at any time. But at the same time, this is pretty fascinating that they were able to do this. They were able to encumber a Twitter account, so you can send messages from it by purchasing an NFT or something. And then also they created a dark DAO within a strategy game called Mischief Plays Venmo. And that's that one. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more about encumbrance to come. And we'll have that paper hopefully complete or at least released in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Great talk, James. I really like the idea of faking your money being stolen. That was one I hadn't heard of before. I'm curious. I think this is a topic that comes up every time people talk about dark DAOs, but I haven't heard a convincing answer. Like, we've had the technology to do this for a while, and the incentives for like voting collusion, these kind of things, have obviously also been there, and yet we don't have any known large examples of this happening. Why do you think that we haven't seen more of it? And why do you think we will in future see more?
Yeah, so our classic answer to that is we don't think DAOs are that decentralized right now, where this would like actually become like a big factor. We think there's too much centralization where there are big players that aren't willing to collude. But as DAOs become more decentralized, we think that like dark DAOs are going to become more attractive, because that would be kind of the only way of amassing lots of voting power, is actually getting lots of people on board and having assurance that they're going to work with you. Like right now, maybe some of the top players can kind of just get in some Telegram chat and say, we're going to do this, let's all do this together. And they kind of can swing the whole vote themselves. And I also will add that multi-signature wallets are kind of like a form of DAO. So I would say those are also pretty vulnerable and should be kept in mind too. Yeah.